it's Coach Tori, and this is Raising Runners. We talk running, fitness, mental health, and so many more topics. As the founder of a youth running program, I approach all of our conversations with our youth athletes in mind and kind of have a focus around those things. But as you will see, we are finding that all of these topics relate to runners and people who like to move and do fitness or anything like that. Relates to everybody. Check it out. All right, it's Coach Tori. Welcome back to the show. We have one of our second returning, I think only our second returning guest, which is super exciting. So we have, do people call you Coach Allen, or what do people call you?
Yeah, some people call me Coach Allen. Yeah, Allen's fine.
Okay.
The running rules, whatever.
Yes, right. I guess we can call you the running. I love all of that. Like, whatever like people's handles are, their name is, I think it's kind of fun to figure out like what people call them. So, okay, well, we have Coach Allen Ladd, the running rules. It's back. He was here probably, oh my gosh, 6 months ago to a year ago almost, talking about nutrition and fueling for running. And I know that was a super helpful episode for everybody. So we have him back today. How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you so much. I had no idea I was the first returning guest, so I'm very honored, excited to be back. Yeah, a lot's happened since I last talked to you. I think it was September I meant to look up. But yeah, everything's great at the minute. Yeah, running's going well, coaching's going well. We've finally got some good weather here. So yeah, I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah. And so I know we briefly talked about you running Boston, but I feel like that's always something so relevant to the running world specifically. But since we're also, I'm East Coast, and I imagine most of the listeners probably are East Coast area. Can you talk a little bit about Boston, like real briefly?
Yeah, sure. Boston had been on my bucket list for several years, probably 4 or 5 years. Once I got into London was the first major. Boston was really the one that I wanted to do, and I was supposed to do it in 2020. Had a place and was training for it, and then of course we know what happened in 2020. It was about 6 weeks out from Boston, and it got cancelled. And
oh my gosh.
yeah, so I think I could have deferred that to 2021, but I also had Berlin that year, so I think everything got rescheduled to the fall of 2021. So it was going to be 2 marathons very close together. Still wasn't sure about the travel situation either, so I put it off. And yeah, 2023, just gone last month, April, was the new date for me. And like I say, I've been looking forward to it for so long. Read all about the history of Boston. It's the oldest marathon that's being continuously run, but it just over delivered so much. It was the first time I'd done a marathon outside of Europe, so it was my first one in America. And it's just, I always think America, everything's done so much bigger and I'd like to say better. I think Boston was definitely a case of that. The crowds are phenomenal. I love the way that the course is. It's point to point, so you start 26 miles out in a little village called Hopkinton, and then you run in, for anyone who doesn't know, to Boston. So most of the big city marathons, you're running around mostly in the city for most of it, but it really has this sort of country feel to it at the start, and you're running through all these towns and villages on the way to Boston. But the road is just lined with supporters all the way, because it's a national holiday, as you probably know. Everyone is just out supporting the marathon. So it was just an incredible experience. I would love to go back and do it. It was a big undertaking because I had to leave the family behind for a week, and yeah, it's a lot in terms of traveling over. It's always difficult to get the balance of days right and the travel, because you don't want to be jet lagged going into the marathon. So I think I arrived Thursday. I gave myself a few days before Boston, and there's so much to do as well. There's so many talks going on and famous people giving talks. I got to see Kipchoge and Meb Keflezighi, and it was just awesome. And just it's for anyone who's just a fan of running, even just going down for the weekend and seeing what's going on. There's a 5K on the Saturday, I think, as well. So um, if you were ever doing the marathon, or you were just going with someone else that did to do the marathon, then you could do the 5K and get a taste of what it's like running on the Boston streets, and finishing up at Boylston Street was really an incredible experience. I recommend it to anyone.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you make it sound so fun. And like I said, it's definitely on the list. But yeah, I didn't even take into account all of like the travel. I mean, the huge time difference, right? Which we're working with right now. And then yeah, I was wondering if your family got to come, but I guess that would be a whole lot for everybody to everyone come over here.
Well,
So
yeah, I think for something like that, the first time, or in 2020, when when I was supposed to be doing it, we were going to come and make it into a holiday for Easter and come over for a couple of weeks. Um, since London in 2019, when Louise was supporting with our two young kids at that time, I think they would have been 6 and 3 or 5 and 2, something like that. Um, it was it was a bit of a chore for her in terms of taking the buggies round on the underground system and trying to find me at different points. I think it really stressed her out, and I think she's happy enough at home when I'm doing those kind of big events. But it would be nice to build that into a holiday. But then again, that you don't want to be doing too much the day before or a few days before. So it's kind of a balance. I If there's one day of the year I really hate, it's the day before marathon day, because you're just resting out, not really doing anything. It feels like a complete waste of time, but it's all for the purpose of being rested and being able to go into it on race day. So yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act. The next one I really want to do is New York. So that's at our Halloween break. So it's possible we might make that into a break, and it's at the end of that week. So we'll look into it. It's not going to be this year, but maybe next year. We'll see.
yeah. Oh my gosh, so cool. Yeah, I was gonna say I want to hear your review of New York, because I know people have nothing but nice things to say about that one as well. All right, let's get into it, because I feel like I constantly get distracted. And I know last time we ended up having to cut you off a little bit because there was so much to talk about. So before my son wakes up and interrupts everything, I figure, we'll try to get into some stuff. So I guess I didn't even say why we're here today. We're talking about improving with age, which I love that I think when we talked last time, that was like an idea you threw out there of like, that's something I can also talk about. So I'm glad we're getting to it, because the big thing I think people love about running too is like, it is something you can do over your entire lifetime, but we're not escaping the aging thing, right? It's happening to all of us, and really changes things. I think sometimes I feel like I'm finally at a point where like I am now like, oh yeah, like nothing feels the same. I am not recovering the same. You can't get away with sleeping for 4 hours, so it is applicable to everyone. So I guess, I mean, do you want to, did you have somewhere you wanted to start with talking about that? I feel like I have a bunch of questions, mostly off of like what, we kind of talked about and what you had shared, but I didn't know if you had somewhere you wanted to start talking about that.
Yeah, well, I suppose I should give some context, because no one knows how old I am.
Oh yeah, right.
And I think age is, it's subjective, and it means something different to everyone. So we're all aging all the time, and we can't get away from that. But it will mean different things to different people. So I turned 40 last month. So I'm now officially a masters athlete. I don't I hate calling myself an athlete, a masters runner, let's say. But I think the first time I really thought a lot about it was when I turned 35, because some of the events, even around here, you'll get age category prizes for 35. That's where it really starts. So some people regard 35 as masters, but hopefully this conversation will be applicable whether you're turning 30, 35, 40, 50, 60. And I think it all depends on where your start point is, in terms of what you've been doing up to the point that you are at now. That's really going to make a big difference as to how you view what you can do in your later years. I think for me personally, I'll give a very brief potted history of what I did, but was not sporty at school at all. My mum took up running in her 40s, so I guess she is really the inspiration for me running. She started running marathons, and when I went to university at the age of 19, she said she wanted to come over and run the marathon, and she suggested that I run it with her. And me, being in my youthful ignorance, thought, oh, well, if my mum can do it, it must be easy. But in fact, she did give me a training plan, and I did follow it pretty well and ran a pretty good time the first time round. Fast forward a couple of years, I got too laid back and thought, I've done it once before, it's going to be really easy. And I bailed out at mile 16 two years later when I was 22. And so then after then, I wasn't serious about running really until my mum passed away in 2014. And that really was the catalyst for me getting back into it. So at that stage, I was into my 30s, and I joined a club, got a bit more serious about it, but I was still very sporadic with training. And it was really when I turned 35, as I said, that I really started thinking, well, what could I possibly achieve with running? What do I want to try and do? And the thing that I really wanted to do was run a sub-3 marathon. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to do that without actually making it happen and actually starting from now. I always thought, I'll do that when I've got more time, or I'll do that when I've got more motivation, but it never really happens unless you make it happen and you actually focus on it. And that's what I did when I turned 35. Actually, just before I turned 35, I sprained my ankle on a race. And that was another thing. It was kind of a wake-up call as to, well, you don't know what's around the corner. That was just a sprain of the ankle. It took me out for 4 weeks, but you don't know what's around the corner. So really, if there is something that you want to do, then starting now is the key to being able to do that. Obviously, there's certain situations, like if you are just about to expect a baby or something, massive, or there's a death in the family, there's massive life circumstances, it might not be the right time and you need to wait 6-12 months or whatever. But for most people, we're just sort of drifting along in life until we make a decision to do something that we want to do. So I guess that's the start point. And from there, I did run my first sub-3 when I was 35, but then I got the bug for it from that point and realized that once I put the work in and got consistent structure, that I could keep on getting better. And that's what I'm still doing. So Boston was actually my fastest time to date. So I was 11 days shy of 40 when I ran Boston. So I'm still improving. Those improvements are getting a lot smaller now, because as you do more and more, it's limited, improvements that you can make. But obviously, if you were, an elite athlete at the start, and you've been going throughout your career running at an elite level, then that's when you're going to tail off more as you get older, because you've done everything that you possibly can. But I think for most of us that we haven't necessarily hit the heights that we could have done when we were younger, and we can still keep on improving. And I see that not just with me, but my clients and people in the club, and you see that all around the running scene as well. You see people running into their 50s and 60s and improving, and even at that age. So I think it depends on what your start point is in terms of what your training is, what your mindset is in terms of what you want to be, what you want to achieve, and then but those two, making a plan to where you want to get to.
Yeah. I think it's really cool right now. And I don't think I followed, those elite athletes very closely for a long time. As a younger person, it's just like track's not the hugest sport, even if you're into running, right? So it's not always easy to find those people. But I've noticed that there are so many older, not old, but like older elite athletes now, right? Like we're seeing, all those marathoners, a lot of them are, late 30s. So we're seeing that it's not like, you're not peaking at 25. So I think that's also really nice to help a lot of us change our mindset of like, you can still improve as you're aging. Like there is not really a limit to that. Cause I know for the longest time I was thinking, after my 20s, I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not gonna be good at running anymore, right? Like it just, and then you regret, you're like, I wasted it. And I don't know if you have this because you weren't, always into running as a younger person, but it's like, yeah, when I ran high school, college, like, especially high school, it was like I walked almost every practice unless it was at the track because no one could see me when you go out on a long run, right? And then you still do okay. So you're just like, yeah, I don't actually need to try that hard. And then college, I ran for a little bit and I was sick, but then, then you turn 21, you're able to drink, so it's just like, you weren't really taking care of yourself at all. So it's like also, a waste. And then, here I am, I'm like, okay, I need to dial it in. I'm like, I wasted all of that time doing, whatever, because it didn't matter. And now like it does matter. So it's definitely nice to see people, run at an elite level as they are not the youngest runners, right? They're not like new to the sport and everything. So I think that's really cool. And yeah, I would love to talk more about, I'm sure we'll get into some mindset stuff too, but then like also how like training kind of fits into your life. And I think we've talked about this even when we were emailing before, when I asked you for some input for like busy people running too, right? Because as we age, oftentimes life gets busier, whether it's different family members, kids, work stuff. I feel like that, you don't have as much free time as you age too. Now I'm like, there's so many directions I want to go. I'm like, I should have thought more before I'm like rambling. Because I think we could definitely talk about nutrition too. So I'm like, um,
I think just what you said there about time is an interesting one. There's a
yeah,
couple of things was wanting to pick up there, but time, like you say, when you're younger, you're not necessarily focusing on one thing unless you're an elite athlete and that's your thing. I went through the same thing, did all the different things and didn't really know what I wanted to do and enjoyed myself and did various different things. And you kind of have the time, and then you look back, and once you don't have that time, I had my first kid when I was 30, yeah, 30, and you suddenly realize then that all that time that you could do anything when you wanted, you didn't have anyone to answer for you. You then have to be there and you have to actually do things and you have commitments. And then I always think of life in 3/3. So the first third when your parents are looking after you, and then the middle third is kind of the hardest bit where we're talking about now, where you've got to look after your kids and potentially you have to look after your parents as well. And then the last third is kind of when you get that time back and maybe your kids are starting to help you and look after you. So this middle third is really difficult, but there's definitely ebbs and flows within that. I think when your kids are really young, it can be really difficult, I think, to make that time. And I'm sure you're probably going through that at the moment. But let me tell you, it does get easier in some respects and harder in others because, once they become a bit more independent, then you are able to get some of that time back, especially if you're working with your partner in terms of sharing that time and having that conversation as to what's important to you. It's great now. My wife Louise is back running. She ran her first marathon in 2019 and then really didn't enjoy that experience and then sort of dropped off for a long time. But we were training for marathons at the same time. And it worked really well because, we would just work it in and around each other. We would, on a Sunday for the long run, I would go out first and then she would go out second. And I didn't feel quite as guilty when she was running because, we were both in it together then. So it from a selfish point, it's nice that she's back into it, but also I can see she's really enjoying it again now, getting back in the club, running with people. So I think the time is there, but there's ebbs and flows definitely depending on, what life situations come up, and you just have to work around those. Sometimes, there might be months or even years where you can't be dialed in and as consistent. But I think as your kids grow up, and hopefully if you don't have parents that need looked after, then there is that time that you can get back. And it's all about looking at the schedule and prioritizing where that time is. And I think you had a really good episode on how to get those runs in, so anyone can look back and find that out. But yeah, I think it's definitely looking for those time slots rather than thinking, oh well, I don't have time. And also the other thing that I wanted to touch on is looking back and being regretful about that wasted time. Obviously that doesn't really help us, but I also think that as you get older, it's not just, I think we always focus on the negativity of aging and the fact that, our bodies are getting older and maybe not quite as able to do the things that we could do when we were younger. But certainly in longer races, and I think that's why you see elites, they'll start off at shorter distance races and then progress through to the longer distance races like the marathon, because they don't quite have necessarily that sharp end speed anymore. But something like the marathon is much more of a tactical and mental battle as well. So every marathon that I do, I always feel like I'm learning something, and I'm getting better in the marathon. I'm executing better every time, and you build up this experience. So there's definitely benefits to getting older, because you're building up that experience of doing the events like the marathon and pushing yourself, and also being a bit more savvy with tactics as well. I think back to my first marathon, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just going in there running and didn't know anything about nutrition, didn't know anything about pacing, and still I make mistakes on some marathons. But I think overall, my execution is getting better and better as I go on with each marathon. So I think there's definitely positives to getting older and building up that experience as well.
Yeah, and so you touched on nutrition, and I think we can definitely talk a little bit about that. Because yeah, as we're getting older, we do have to keep all of those things in mind, but also, yeah, like we know more, we've learned things about ourselves, we've learned things that other people have tried. So can you talk a little bit about like all the other things that we have to do in terms of being good at running, like the mobility, the strength, because especially I know you constantly hear, and I'm sure you do too, but they're always talking about, like, as women are aging, we need to be lifting more, you're losing all that muscle mass. And for running, we know that we need to also have that strength training kind of put in there as well, just to keep our body from totally breaking down, right? So can you talk a little bit about those things, the strength, mobility, maybe the nutrition as well? Because again, it's like super important for us to just, at all ages, be healthy runners too.
Yeah, definitely. Strength training was something that was not on my radar at all when I was before 35, before I took that jump into faster marathons. And even when I was 35, I didn't have a coach at that point, so I hired a coach in 2020. I was doing it sporadically. So that first sub-3 marathon, I did no strength training at all, I'll be honest. But I kind of see strength training as not just an insurance policy against injury, but definitely when you're pushing yourself for a long period of time, if you don't have the strength there, that's where you can really sort of break down and lose time in the marathon. It's really difficult to keep going, especially, into the latter end of the marathon without that strength and being able to keep going and keep executing the same stride pattern for that length of time. So 2020, when I hired a coach, I was quite a bit more consistent with it. It's still not something I enjoy doing. I'll be honest on that. But I think when we think about strength training, quite often we think as runners, we don't have enough time to do the running. So how am I going to have enough time to do the strength as well? And I think just a small dose to get started is going to really help anyone. So I do 2 times 30 to 45 minutes a week, and you can fit that in quite easily, especially if you're doing body weight exercises and you don't have to go to the gym. I'm not a gym goer. I don't want to have to go somewhere else to do my strength. You can use free weights at home. There's so many exercises that you can do, and I do believe that it helps. I'm sure there's a lot of studies that support this. It's not one of my areas of expertise, so I have a lot of exercises that I do both either from my coach, and now I'm working with a physio as well. So we're working on where my imbalances are, and I think if you want to improve quite a lot, then these little things, seeing a physio and working out where your weaknesses are going to be really important. You know, they seem like things that maybe only elites would do, but there's always more things that you can do. So if you're starting from a low base, then just a general strength training program, 2 times a week is going to help. But then if you get more and more invested in yourself and wanting to go on to a higher level, I do think it's worth working with someone to work out where those personal imbalances for you are. And obviously, a general strength training program for runners is going to focus on quite a lot of leg exercises, but also core work. So things like planks and sit-ups and press ups to build that core and strength around there. So that's really important. Mobility is also something that I'm not very good at. But I have clients that swear by doing things like Pilates. I've done a bit of Pilates, and again, it's something because I run 6 days a week and I do 2 strength training sessions. It's something that isn't in my schedule at the minute, but as I'm getting older, I can feel all the time that there's little aches and pains. Especially problematic for me is, no, well, it's not that problematic, but in the last 6 months, my back's been a bit stiff. So I do a few stretches for my back. But that's all, if we're thinking about not just running, but for life in general, you want to be mobile and strong when you're, getting into your later life, because that means that you're going to be more likely to be self-sufficient anyway. So I do think that's important for everyone, not just for runners. If we're talking about nutrition, I think covering the 2 tips I would have for nutrition is to make sure you're covering your nutritional bases. And by that, I mean that you're eating a wide variety of whole foods, because that's going to give you, all of the nutrients that you need. And if you are restricting a certain food category, so for instance, I'm vegetarian through choice, so I know that I'm not getting the things from meat that I might need. So I'm particularly careful about protein sources, and might need to look at meals and make sure that I've got protein in there. Protein is very important because as we age, as you said, we lose muscle mass unless we are proactive about that. It's not a guarantee, because you can mitigate at least some of that by doing strength training and consuming protein to be able to build that muscle back. But yes, it gets harder as you get on. So that's why those two things in tandem are really going to help to mitigate that. And obviously you need those muscles for running, that if you start losing that muscle mass, then not only are you not going to be able to lift, but running's going to be harder as well. So it is really important for runners as well.
Yeah. And recovery too. I can't believe I didn't kind of throw that into that question as well. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably a dumb question because I'm sure, we're always supposed to be getting those 8 hours of sleep, even when you don't actually feel like you need it. But does recovery get longer? Do you just maybe feel it a little more, or is like that kind of just like, yeah, the standard, you got to get your 8 hours of sleep? Maybe, like you said, you mentioned stretching. I don't know, some people swear by the foam roll or like any of that stuff. Is there a general rule on recovery, do you think?
I think it's going to be all independent,
Yeah.
individual again. Sleep though is really important for everyone. And again, something that you're not necessarily going to be able to get depending on what's going on in your life, but it's definitely something, it's a big win if you can get sleep. That's going to have a massive impact on everything else. It has an impact on training and nutrition, because if you're tired and groggy and you just don't make the best decisions, so that might be poor training decisions, i.e. either not doing training or doing too much training, not having a good balance there. Or it could be nutrition, not having, deciding to not eat well or healthily. So sleep's a massive one. Stress is another one as well. If you've got a lot of stress in your life, then that's quite difficult and demanding for training, because the two things sort of are going to come together and really run you down and increase that possibility that you're going to get injured. So trying to drive down stress and get better sleep is going to help you in terms of your mood and also in terms of reducing that injury risk. Because if there's anything that's going to hold you back, it's going to be getting injured, because we can't get better while we're injured. We can't improve training wise when we're injured. In terms of recovery, I think it's important to get a consistent schedule. So again, with injury risk, and not just injury risk, but improvement as well, that's going to come about when you give your body a similar load week on week. So if you're suddenly up one week and then down the next and yo-yoing all about, that's when you increase the injury risk, but you also don't see the real benefits of the training. And that's what my training looked like in my early 30s. It was, a few weeks of really good training, then be not doing nothing with my feet up for a couple of weeks. And I'm sure there was some weeks when I was ill and I couldn't have trained, but I'm sure it wasn't all like that. So that consistency is really important. But with the recovery, I have heard that people might need longer recovery as you get older, in terms of recovery from harder sessions. That would be the main one for me. So I do 6 days of running a week, but I only have 2 hard sessions, and they would be Tuesday and Friday. So they're well spaced out. It's not like I'm doing a hard session on a Tuesday and then a hard session on a Wednesday and then a hard session on a Thursday. It's making sure it's nicely spaced out, and just being honest with your body, how you're feeling, and taking that extra day if you need to. Definitely in the last training cycle, I took more days off than I had in any of my previous cycles with my coach. I think I probably took 2 or 3 days off when I was scheduled a run in there, just because I didn't feel like I was 100% recovered. And it's just finding that balance. You don't want to take too much off so that your training becomes inconsistent. But sometimes when you know yourself that you're a bit low and not properly recovered, just taking that extra day can really help and get you back for the next session or the race or whatever is coming up. I think that's really important. Some people, when they get a training plan, they get really dialed into it, and I'm definitely don't want to miss a session. And I've tried to go away from that now and be a bit more realistic and flexible with my training. So yeah, and the other thing with recovery is that you can change the cycle of your training. So I've heard of people doing not necessarily week cycles, but it could be 9 or 10 days where they always have 2 or 3 easier days in between those harder sessions. It could be a 14-day cycle where you only have one long run. And the other way you can make it easier on your body is potentially by adding cross training in. It's not something, again, that I've needed to do or wanted to do yet, but it's definitely, I would keep an open mind on that. If I feel like my joints are not recovering properly, day on day with the runs, then it's possible that I could do something on the bike instead to keep that that training stimulus in there, but ensure that we're not, making our joints worse and giving them some recovery. So those are all options, I think, but it's really going to depend person to person what suits you and what you like doing, and also where your body is and how you're feeling.
Yeah, well, and I feel like that's just such a good argument for like why a running coach can be so valuable, and especially like as you are, as people are aging too, because not only does it help with, I would think, with like the simple things of, we run into those plateau, we've run for so many years, we stop progressing necessarily. I know people talk about that all the time, and I'm sure it can like easily be tweaked by just, changing up your training plan, having someone look a little more into it. I know a lot of the free plans and stuff that you find online can be great, especially as you're getting into running, to help, progress it and progress nice and slowly and all that. But then it's like, there's kind of no variation. There's no, you're just kind of here now. Right. So yeah, not only can I think it helps with, avoiding those issues, but then like you're saying, yeah, like everything's kind of individualized. A lot of people follow that 7-day cycle, but sometimes a 10 might make more sense. And like you're saying, throwing in the cross training can helping with that. So I'm sure you see that a lot with the people that you work with, is like everybody has a different schedule they're working with, different plan they're working with. Some people do cross training, some people don't. So yeah, no, that is super helpful. Kind of doing a total pivot just because I wanted to. So you put in some of the things that you wanted to talk about, talking about like season's best instead of personal best, but then also the age grading. Can you, for like, what is it, age grading calculators? Is that what's in here? Or what am I talking about now?
Yeah.
Yes, right. Okay. Can you explain that to people? Because I actually, for all of the years I've ran, I just figured out what that was like over the winter when I did a race series, and that's how they gave out their medals. And my friend and I who were running, we were like, I'm sorry, what is this? So can you explain that to everybody?
Yeah, I should have looked up exactly what it is, but I'm going to give you what I think it is, and then you can correct me if you know what the answer is. So age grading is basically a score that you can be assigned to any given performance. It's basically a percentage. So obviously up to 100%, which no one is going to get, but it's a percentage of it. It's a comparison of your time for your age against the world's best at that age, I think.
Yeah.
So what that means is if say, for instance, you are the same age as the world record holder, then it's literally just a comparison between your time and the world record. But obviously, as we go up, if you're 60, then the world's best time for the marathon at 60 is probably still quite high, but it's not 2:01 or whatever it is these days for the marathon. It's probably around about 2:25, 2:30, something like that. So you're being compared against that time, not the world record. So then that means that as you get older, your times might get slower, but your age grading might still hold up, or you might even improve your age grading percentage. So it's also a good metric to sort of compare yourself with younger athletes as well. So are you comparatively as good as them, you know, in your age bracket. So I think there's sort of tiers of percentages and what they mean, but I think 60% is a really good starting point, or 50 to 60% is a really good starting point. And then 70, if you can get to 70%, that's kind of like you know, top of your club sort of level. I think 80% is kind of top of your area level, and then 90% is kind of top of your national athletics or whatever. So if you're up in the 90s, then you're doing very well. So what I find here is that quite often it is the older athletes that are around here that are really hitting those top end percentages, sort of 80-90%. So I don't know if that's typical everywhere or if we've just got a lot of gifted older athletes, but people in their 60s hitting those really high percentage age grading rankings. And it's a good way of trying to measure yourself year on year. If you are finding that you can't keep up with your younger self, then trying to improve that age grading is another way of measuring improvement, really.
Yeah. So we don't have a lot. I mean, I'm sure like I could obviously figure it out, but yeah, like I said, we have this one race series over the winter where we did that. And I thought it was such a cool, it was a smaller race, so it kind of was easy for them to do, but it was such a cool way for them to give out the medals instead of just doing like who ran first, second, third. But so you said Boston was your best marathon so far. Is that correct? Okay. So
Yes.
you're currently in the still like going for that personal best. Do you have any like thoughts on how you're gonna, I guess you're just gonna have to adjust eventually, right? But like, you know, where do you think you're gonna be at with like your mindset on, okay, now I'm not chasing that personal best, but I'm trying to just improve through the season or whatever it is. Like, have you thought through kind of keeping your head in the game of like, I still want to try really hard and improve, but like, you know, eventually you're gonna be looking at different times?
Yeah, it's something I definitely have thought about, and then I try not to think about the minute because I'm still still hopefully I'm improving. But honestly, I think if you told me now that I'm never going to run a faster marathon again, I wouldn't be that disappointed because I know that I've given a lot in the last few years to try and get better, and to run my best at Boston. It was really special. You know, it's not an easy course, so you're always thinking, on an easier course, could I have run faster? And then you think, well, that means next time I will run faster, and that's obviously not necessarily the case because, you know, everything has to go right in the race, and it's not just the training that has to go right, but then the execution on race day. So it's possible that I'll never run a faster marathon again. I would like to think that I would, but I think at that point I would then start. I'm already starting to look at, well, what races are around here where there's age category prizes or age category events in them. How high up can I get in those? So there's different competitions there. One of the things that I it's a silly thing, but one thing that I would like to do one day is run 2 hours plus my age for the marathon. So around 2:46 in Boston. So I would have had to have run 2:39 to do that. Obviously, every year I get an extra minute. So if I was able to run the same time in 6 years' time, then I would be able to do it. But that's a silly personal thing. But then also then looking at the age grading thing and seeing, can I keep that rate that I've got to it now through later on in life. And it might be that I decide at some point I want to focus on something else. So in the back of my mind, I think I could be competitive at ultras. But at the moment, it's not something that I want to spend a lot of time. I don't want to spend a lot of time at the weekends out for 5, 6, 7 hours when I've got kids in the house. So it might be quite a while down the line till I get to that. But then at that point, there's always other challenges. You can keep on trying to get faster or trying to maintain a certain level at one thing, but there's other things out there, and there's a lot of those kind of challenges, those ultra kind of challenges that really appeal to me in terms of the experience of it. There's a mountain loop in England called the Bob Graham Round, which is over 42 mountains, and you have to try and do that in 24 hours. And I really love to do that, but at the minute I just don't have the time to train for that or to go over and recce the route. So it's something for later on in life. And then there's events that I want to do. I want to do the New York Marathon. I want to do well, that would be my fourth star if I did New York. So Chicago wasn't really on my radar, but the more people I talk to, more people say I should do Chicago as well. So then that would be five, and then there's only Tokyo left unless they add more on there. So there's all different kinds of challenges. So I think once time goes out the window for me, there's always something else to latch onto, and it doesn't have to be time improvements all the time. I will be a little bit sad though, but there's plenty of other things to do.
Yeah, and that is like, I think kind of almost going full circle is like all the things to love about running, right? Like, yeah, there's different kinds of races like ultras. There's different, I guess like notches on your belt of like, getting Chicago, New York, Tokyo. So yeah, it kind of is like the possibilities are endless. With that, I feel like we're running out of time per usual, right? But did you have any, because I know there's probably things we didn't get to, but did you have any like last tips or any kind of like closing anything, putting you on the spot here?
Yeah, I think the only thing that we didn't talk about and I wanted to sort of highlight again is I really think a good support network around you is really important for achieving anything. And we're talking about improving running, but the two things is that you really need to enjoy what you're doing, because that is going to lead to the improvement. I think once you start falling out of love with the process of training, then it's really difficult to make any improvements. And at the minute, I love the training. I remember back when I was inconsistent with races, saying that I would do a marathon every day of the week if I didn't have to do the training. I was kind of missing the point in terms of the training is all of it really, and the marathon experience is kind of the icing on the cake. So if you don't enjoy the training process, find something that you do like doing, or try and build the training to a way that suits you, because that is really going to keep you going and keep you improving. But also finding that support network, whether it's your partner, family, or friends, or joining a club, or even getting a coach or a physio to work with you, is really going to focus you on what's important. Because sometimes I think when you're in your own bubble, or you're training for something, and you printed a plan off, but you've only really got yourself for accountability. You've no one to bounce ideas off. And sometimes I remember last year having a conversation with my coach before, or at the start of the training cycle for London. This was in the summertime. I'd just done a really good marathon in the spring, and I was having doubts as to whether I wanted to do another marathon cycle. And he was fine with that, but he asked me the question, well, what else would you do instead? And I started thinking about it, and I was thinking about the ultras. That was the thing that was taking me away from possibly doing the marathon. And I thought about the kind of training that I would need to do to be successful at that, and be out of the house for long periods of time at the weekend when the kids were home. And I thought that's not what I want to do for the next 4-5 months. And I decided that I'd enjoyed the last training cycle, and there was more there. I knew I had Boston the next year, so it was a natural continuation. But it was just thinking about the process of that training and enjoying it. So I think even if it's just a friend or a partner, or even that doesn't know about running, just bouncing those ideas of what you want to achieve and what you want to do and what time you can carve out is really important to being able to improve at anything. And no more so when you're battling against age as well. You that sort of investment and support from others as well. So that would be my final tip, I suppose.
Yeah, well, and anybody who listens to the show knows I'm constantly talking about how much I love the running community and the support that's in it. So that was kind of a perfect closing. And then can you, now that I'm like asking you more stuff, as I'm like, we gotta go. Can you just like give everybody a quick preview of your podcast so that people know like what to expect to tune into? It's The Running Rules, right?
Yes. So since I was on here, you've inspired me to start my own podcast. Started in February. So yes, it's the Running Rules podcast. And mostly the first few episodes has been me talking about my views on different things on running, from nutrition, training, mindset, execution. But I've started bringing on guests. Hopefully we might be able to get you on. It would be awesome. And yeah, it's the Running Rules podcast, and you can find that on pretty much everywhere, I think. Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely check that out, everybody, because it is definitely a good one. And who wouldn't want to hear more from Alan, right? Thank you so much for coming on and making the time. And yes, we'll have to look at my schedule, and I'll look at your schedule and see if we can make another early morning recording, probably.
Yeah, hopefully maybe a bit later for you, for your sake.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And this was great information for everybody.
No, thank you so much for having me on again. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe, all the things that you can do for a podcast that you enjoy listening to. Make sure you check out social media, our website, any of those things. If you have questions, comments, interview requests, feel free to email me at marikeyrunclub@gmail.com.